Welcome to the Rainmaker Multiplier on Demand, a podcast for leading financial professionals, or Rainmakers, and their teams that offer support for securing a successful future. From marketing help to staffing structure, listen and subscribe for actionable insights from advisors and skilled professionals alike.
Thank you all for being here. I see we got people rolling in here, but excited about this week's topic. We're going to be sharing some of the things that we've been doing and learning over on the JL Smith side, including on the C2P side with Desiree and Andrei, our guests that I'll introduce in a second here. But what we've learned over time in terms of what we should be tracking to help optimize that marketing to sales pipeline. And that's, I think, the key that we're going to hear a lot of today is making sure that as much as possible to keep integrating those two, as they are separate and a lot of times separate teams. But the more that those can be integrated and working together on your end, the more efficient and effective that pipeline management will be. And we'll be able to share some of those stories and tips that we've learned along the way at both companies on both sides there. So before we get started, introducing today's guests again. First, both returning guests and hosts, I believe. I think you both hosted as well. But Andrei Henson, our advisor growth specialist at C2P, and Desiree Sgro, business development associate here. So thank you both for joining us again.
Thanks for letting us back on camera.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
See, that's what happens. You nail it. You get invited back more and more. So, Andrei, we'll turn to you first. So starting with the basics, when we say know your numbers, what are the most important metrics that advisors should be tracking within their BD, their business development pipeline?
Yeah. So thinking about it specifically, especially from the transition from marketing to business development, we track a lot, kind of the gross and net numbers. So we think of gross as the total amount, of leads that we get, total amount of right fit calls scheduled. Again, if you're following the bucket plan process, our process is the discover, design, delivery, dedicate, but it starts with that 20-minute fit call. So that's one of the things that we really like to track, right fit calls held, that we can get into the actual minutia of what's being held, what's being converted on. And that way you can see the gaps or any disconnects between the calls to action within your marketing campaigns to set up kind of those introductory calls versus how it moves on to the business development process. Again, kind of that starting process of the discovery call. So that's what we kind of look at. Again, each individual step of the process, we will want to track discoveries scheduled, discoveries held, and then ultimately how they convert to the end of the process for the deliverables or clients won. So those are some of the things we look at as far as just total numbers. There are some other metrics we sort of look at as far as, the lead source versus the booking source. I think we might get onto that later, but those are some of the numbers that I think we track, Matt. Anything I missed?
No, I think that, and I'm glad you mentioned that because we're going to get into the tracking between each step in the process in the pipeline later, and especially digging into the lead and booking source. And maybe we just pivot there now because I think that is such an interesting one that a lot of advisors I know that we speak with on mentor calls or the coaching calls maybe haven't thought to track it this way. But Des, could you kind of define for us what we mean by that when we say the tracking of a lead source versus a booking source?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's important to differentiate the two and track the two. So the lead source is basically how your lead entered your CRM or how they found you. So a couple of examples could be an ebook, a webinar, or an ad. They clicked on you through an ad that you're serving. Excuse me. The booking source is a little bit different in they might have found you in the lead source, but how are you setting them up and booking time with them for your first meeting? So another couple examples could be a business development event, an in-person meeting, or a dinner, and then they book time on your calendar after that. The reason why I think it's important to differentiate those two is it's very helpful in measuring ROI. We talk about ROI all the time, talking about your different marketing efforts. So want to make sure you're differentiating those, measuring those to see what topic is most successful, and making sure you're getting the most out of your ad spend or marketing efforts. So those are kind of the differentiators between the two, and I think why it's important to track both of them.
And kind of to that point, Desiree, like one of the reasons we started tracking that is because we've seen that we'll have multiple calls or multiple bookings with individual prospects. So what that means is each kind of lead source, each prospect in our CRM, they're only going to have one lead source. That's
Right.
the marketing used to pay for that ad to get it into the CRM. The booking source is kind of how business development we use to track what's getting them on the calendar. So to get kind of the point, is it the lead source is a referral? And now we're getting them to actually take action by listening to one of the podcasts, downloading one of our, ebooks around some of our timely topics, or like if you're more looking at not the pipeline, but your existing book of business, like to track future growth. Like you might track, and advisors tell us this a lot, like 80% kind of my book of business, the lead source was from a referral. But then if you're looking at your pipeline, you might see that, hey, even though the lead source are going to be coming mostly from referrals once they get into my database, most actually, after looking at and crunching the numbers between the source and booking, I see you nodding, Matt, like sometimes they might take action from something that you might not expect. Like we found this here at C2P, they might take more action from it's like a quick download, like an ebook or an advisor guide where they can quickly read, download, and then book a next step. But we've seen like more successfully is maybe the referrals or in-person events where you can get more of that widening in the funnel. So that's the difference in kind of the importance of how we historically have tracked the lead source and the booking. And even over time, like you might see, a change or a trend in between the booking source as your content or as your marketing plan develops. So good point, Des.
Yeah. And I like how you did say, the lead source will always be the same. And we'll talk a little bit about consistency and how you can move, like continue to book meetings and being consistent through that process. So I think that was a good point.
Yeah, and you both mentioned something that I want to like really hammer home because of the importance of it from both sides. Because what we're talking about really is attribution here, and not to get too technical, but there's various kinds of attribution models, and the reason we talk about that is what we all want to know: are we getting the ROI on the spend and the time that we're doing on these activities? Because anything you're doing from a marketing and BD standpoint, you're either spending dollars on it or you're spending time on it. And are you getting the return on that value? And it's important to look at it on both sides. That's why we're spending so much time on the lead and booking source here. And we do it at C2P and JL Smith. Because it's not always we call it the one size fits all. Like very rarely is someone going to look at one ebook, download an ebook and say, I am ready to move all of my assets over. It takes time. And we're going to get into it later. I'll actually share it now. I attended, a lot of you might have been on this as well, but Michael Kitces holds his biannual marketing summit virtually. And they had an advisor showcase on there saying that it takes an average of 3 to 5 webinars before someone finally books a call. So even that, they're effective, they're getting them to book, but it's taking multiple touch points. So that's why we're seeing more and more that not just advisors, but really businesses in general are tracking this kind of multi-touch point, multi-channel attribution modeling. And the lead and booking are kind of like the first and the last of that. So where you're spending those dollars and those times. Am I getting the value initially am I adding leads to my database, the lead source? And am I spending the dollars or the time in the right places to get them to book a call with us to ultimately get them to go through the bucket planning process? And, both Andrei and Des shared good examples of what we've done at C2P. It's been the same at JL Smith. And I'll share an example that kind of would resonate, with you here. We started a lot of content marketing probably 5-6 years ago over at JL Smith, doing a lot of ebooks and running Facebook ads. So some of you might already be doing that or thinking about doing that. And I highly recommend it from the standpoint it is a very low cost way to add leads to your database. Our agency team, I know, is running this with a few offices, but let's say on average $9 to $15 for a lead, going there running an ebook ad. But we didn't see a lot of people downloading an ebook and then going right into the process. But once we started tracking this, we see the lead source for ebook was very high. We had a lot of people coming in and it's very low cost on our end. But then when we started driving that audience to either attend a webinar or attend one of our in-person events, that's when they were then booking on the calendar. That's when they started to build that rapport with our advisor presenters to book. So by tracking both their lead source and booking source, we were able to see, hey, even though we didn't get a lot of people entering our funnel directly from the ebooks, that was still a valuable use of our resources in terms of our budget to get them into the funnel in the first place to now convert them after the webinar. So hopefully that example too kind of resonates of like why this is so important to be looking at both. And most CRMs should allow you to track both or even to add fields to do that. Worst case, there's always a workaround, and you know our team be able to kind of help talk you through how to make that work. But that's something if you're not doing that, and it's a got to start somewhere kind of thing. So even if you're not tracking both now, like, hey, say as of this date, we're going to start doing it, or maybe you are able to kind of backtrack. I know when we started doing this back, a few years back at JL Smith, someone went back and they were able to go back at least like 3 months. So we had some data to start with. And now you can start to measure the trends from those of like, here's how many are coming from this lead source. Here's how many coming from this booking source. And then really where it helps, again, looking really future casting is when you're budgeting for next year, because now you're able to say, hey, these were really effective as in terms of the number of leads coming in and the cost per lead for a lead source. And here's where we want to spend our time and money because it's getting them over that hurdle to actually get on our calendars.
Yeah, I would double down on that too. This is not just like reporting for reporting's sake, more data, more metrics to be tracking for the tracking's sake. Like these are real things that you can use for the forecasting so that we can start seeing the end result of, X amount of new leads versus the booking source. Very important. So yeah, forward thinking.
And before we go on to the next question, I'll just real quick, because it looks like in the chat, a couple questions about the ebook. I know, those that are kind of all in working with us at C2P, you can go on C2P Central and there's some templates that are in there you can work with. If you're working with the agency team, reach out to your reps there or to Carrie in terms of like customizing those to work for you. But if you aren't using those or want to create your own, chat, these days chat GPT makes everything easier. Or even if everyone has the more thought leadership than they think. And I don't want to dovetail into a total separate topic here. But either using chat GPT or if you are currently if you have a webinar or a workshop that you can record and then transcribe that, you're going to have the start of an ebook already right there. So even if you don't want to use the ones we have on C2P Central, that's where I'd recommend kind of starting if you wanted to create your own there.
One more thing, Matt, before you
go ahead, Des.
transition to the next topic. What also might be interesting to track with lead source and booking source is the time frame in between. So like if you have a lead source and let's say even a year ago they joined a webinar, like how many touch points in between did you have until they actually booked? Because that will indicate, give you a really good indication on your sales cycle. So even measuring length of time, like they attended a webinar, like Matt said, maybe 3-4 times until they book with you. Well, how long is that taking? So then it gives you some insights on how long your sales cycle is. How long do we even get them to the first meeting? So just some insight there.
No, thank you. And it brings up another good point of the more you get zeroed in on these numbers, the more you track, the more data you have to work with, you'll even start to zero in on which topics are most effective. We had to start with something, back 4 or 5 years ago of just tracking our numbers in general. But then we start to see the trends of, Social Security webinar for us at JL Smith is going to produce large volumes of numbers, but not a lot of conversions. But then we would promote to that audience some of our tax presentations, especially the tax trilogy one that we rolled out, I think about 1.5 years ago now, the 7 steps one that Dave created. And that one has been a huge in terms of conversion standpoint. So even figuring out which topics you can layer on each other, some you might want to purposely run first, even though you don't expect the conversion, because hey, if I run this, I'm going to get 80 registrants, but then I'm going to promote the taxes one to those 80, and that's where I'm going to get my 20 bookings from. So again, just the more you zero in on those, the better. And I guess, Des, you started talking the time between them. I guess that does kind of segue into our next question too. Of, where do you, or for you and Andrei to address this, where do you commonly see the biggest gaps in the pipeline, or leaks, those kind of falling through? I hate to say falling through the cracks, but maybe stalling out is a better phrase in terms of, because it's not a no, it's just a not now.
Yep, I'm very passionate about this one, so I'll start with it. But just to kind of close the last question, and I'll move on to this one. Just another quick fix, like if you're identifying these numbers in your pipeline and you say, okay, it takes 4 weeks, for them to book a meeting. That's a good way to go back and say, okay, let's get them to 3 weeks. Let's get them to 2 weeks. So then you're moving your sales cycle along faster. And each step of the process, you're identifying, okay, it takes us a month to get them into the first call. Let's get it to 3 weeks. And then the discovery meeting, it takes them 6 weeks to get to the design. Let's move it to 5. So that's a really quick solution once you identify on how to fix it and address moving your sales cycle faster. Now, I'm passionate about the next topic is because it's a very, very simple elementary thing, but I rarely see people do it. Have the next meeting on the calendar booked at your first meeting. So after your first meeting in person, the next call to action is, let me look at your calendar. Let me look at mine. When can we set our next meeting? Because really the goal of your first meeting is to sell the next meeting. So I think this step will significantly improve your pipeline, because we end that meeting, you move on to something else, you go on your email, you try to schedule the next meeting, you're comparing calendars, you pick up the phone, you call them. That takes time. So having them in front of you and their attention, just book the next meeting while you're there. Stop the meeting and book the next one. So I feel like that is a big gap or leak that can significantly improve your pipeline, and it's a quick fix.
No, thank you. Andrei, anything to add to that one?
Only thing I'd add, the biggest drop off I see would be, it's usually after the discovery meeting, right? You have the qualifying call. Goal of the qualifying fit call is to qualify, explain the value of your firm, and then to book next steps. So on that discovery meeting is kind of where we're first getting into the weeds, right? Of their opportunity, of explaining the value of the firm, and then ultimately moving to design. I think we see the biggest drop off there. Either one, there are several reasons. One, to Des's point, not having the next step book. Next reason is, it's kind of goes back to the the analogy that if there is not a strong enough need or not a strong enough emotion, like, people will not take action, right? So it's not that they need to book the next step for coming into the design and starting to build a financial plan, starting to look at where their accounts are. It's not about qualified versus non-qualified dollars. It is the pain behind it, right? So if you're addressing that at the end of your discovery call, what I've seen in my experience, the designs are going to have a higher show rate, right? So it's more of the pain to, hey, I'm not sure if me and my spouse are going to be able to afford long-term care. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to stay in our home, or if there will be opportunities for moving to, a nursing facility. I'm not sure if my kids are going to have to take out, loans for continuing education, like me and my spouse did. Like, there are deeper pain points that you can get into. And I usually try to hammer home, especially teaching with newer or younger advisors, sales associates. If you're not beginning and ending the meeting, like what that end result or what that pain translates to, there's not going to be a strong emotion for when they're thinking back 2 weeks later for, why am I having this design call? It's not going to be the emotion or, the logic with the actual facts are going to be presented. Usually, again, just my experience, they're going to go back to the emotion they felt after the discovery call. And if your emotion is strong in the pain that you're tying to, that you're going to be solving along your process, along the bucket plant process, once that mark has been hit, usually that's where we see another increase. So a combination of emotion, buying personas, then ultimately having the strong pain and the ability to solve that with a high degree of efficiency.
You're right. And I mean, that's our industry. It becomes emotional decisions.
Exactly.
And with that, Andrei, too, is like, we know a lot of this throughout the whole process. Like, you're selling one step at a time. The marketing has to sell that. The marketing messaging has to sell them on attending a webinar, downloading an ebook, attending an event, whatever. Then you got to sell them on the right fit call. The right fit call sells them on that. When they're in the discovery, and a lot of times that is the first in-person reaction, it might be that feeling of, I have to sell them on coming back to design. Because we see the same thing at JL Smith. That's our biggest drop off throughout the whole process, is discover to design. And the shift that we have is that mentality of don't sell them on it, make it seem like it is part of the process, but a seamless part where we use the doctor's office mentality.
Cool.
Hey, even if you're not sure, let's set a date just to make sure that we have that follow-up set. We can always come back and move that date and adjust and add someone if we need to, but let's just get that on the calendar, because now at least you have a date on there to start with versus letting someone walk out the door and now you're just playing phone tag, and that tends to be the holdup when you get to that. So taking that kind of doctor's office mentality can help from a customer service standpoint as well. Yes, if you are tracking your numbers, or if you're starting from somewhere, a big thing too, if you're following that, I call it the sales waterfall, but starting backwards, take whatever numbers you have of, hey, if I need this many conversions, how many people do I need to go through the process to get that? How many do I need to set a discovery before I go through that? How many right fit calls do I need to get to that? And how many leads do I get to get to that many right fit calls? So once you start gathering that data, you can start to kind of work that in reverse order to figure out what your version of the 10-3-1 is. And Christian, the tech on our side, actually both at C2P and JL Smith, there's a variety of different technology that we use. But in terms of tracking leads, and then especially the lead and booking source, we use HubSpot. And we use that as our marketing CRM at both organizations. And then we do have another CRM that talks to. So at JL Smith, we use HubSpot, and then that talks back and forth with Smart Office. And so I know there's a couple other offices doing the same thing actually with those same two softwares. But these days, especially with APIs, not to get too technical on that, but if you did want to run multiple CRMs, because a lot of traditional CRMs probably won't be able to track a lot of those. But if you did want to use a different one, those can talk back and forth. And then the other thing we've talked about using EOS in the past, but we have a weekly scorecard. So a lot of these numbers go onto the scorecard where you're tracking it could be number of registrants per week, or we track number of discovery appointments each week, assets pending, assets transferred. So all of those on the scorecard. So whether you're exporting that right out of the CRM to do a data analysis, or you're going off of your scorecard, off of those weekly metrics, hopefully this is answering that question of, depending on which metric we're tracking and the frequency of it, because again, that could be a totally different topic. And I think we've actually done a podcast on that, and we can probably bring it back to a coffee break too. But there's going to be certain metrics that make sense to track on a weekly basis, and some that, just because of how much they can fluctuate, don't make sense to track until it's more of a monthly, a quarterly, and potentially even an annual tracking in that sense. Like if you're tracking cost per qualified lead, going week to week, it's going to fluctuate so much. That might be something you want to look at like on a monthly or quarterly basis to make those adjustments. But happy to dive more into that one. That's obviously something our marketing and BD team very passionate about. But yeah, right now the primary technologies we're using to track and report and analyze those would be HubSpot, Smart Office, being this two CRMs, and then Bloom software is what we use for running EOS there. Andrei, Des, coming back to the other questions, because I know this is flying by because there's so much good information, a lot of good questions, but something I know we did want to get into in terms of the consistency of the follow-up and the nurturing and improving pipeline efficiency. Speaking to that, of how we have measured and optimized that, but specifically what I want to make sure we hit on with the handful of minutes we have left is kind of the new category we created a few years back, that we call like the qualified not interested bucket, or the pre-drip, either one of those that you want to term that. And some of you might have a category like this once you hear what we're describing, but if you don't, definitely something I'd recommend. So Andrei, Des, who wants to take this first, but kind of explaining the what and the why behind our qualified not interested category.
Yeah, I can take lead. So this kind of began with us needing to have a new kind of segment for the type of prospects that we're meeting with. And like Matt said, we came up with the phrase Q&I, or qualified not interested. So all that basically means is they are an existing prospect that marketing dollars have already paid for, but we have qualified them. So we know they have the investable assets, they have the, the qualifications from a culture perspective. They're qualified to work with us, but there's just not that interest yet, or there wasn't the ability to convert them on that first initial call. So we started tracking this just because, and we know on the B2B side, we just simply have a longer sales cycle. So we started to track these, we wanted to know and make sure that we were tracking on the CRM side, who was qualified, who have we spoken with, who can we move the conversation with further on the next interaction. What we found was, kind of the moving to the next phase of why it's so important, is we almost had the ability to create completely separate like drip campaigns for prospects we already knew were qualified from an asset perspective. So instead of setting up a new email campaign, instead of doing a whole calling campaign, trying to find which prospects were qualified, trying to do that digging, right? We could go straight through and start a whole separate lead follow-up specifically for people we had already spoken with, already met with, and already qualified. And they've already had an initial introduction where it's not just an email correspondence, but we've already had the ability to, explain, here's what JLS does, here's with the importance of the tax management. So explaining the value as well. Ticking off all three of those is very, very powerful. I mean, think of it from a marketing perspective, how much you need to charge or how much it costs to get, a sales qualified lead, and the ability to have already met with them. Like, we have doubled and even tripled down on following up with sending special, like we talked about this last time, our WOW process for continually trying to add value, because there is no more like setting up a qualifying or a fit call. The next step is basically moving to discovery with the sales funnel, right? So it's moving them into the actual process. So from there, you have the ability and ultimately the freedom to kind of go show them a lot of love, right? There's no more needing to prove or needing to explain or find kind of they have the value or you have the value. Now it's just putting the pieces together. And if you have, a database of 50, 100 of people that are between that, say $500 to $1.5 million in investable assets that you can just spend time, every couple of weeks, every month, having the team or yourself doing a quick outreach or sending a new maybe blog or content that you've created like specifically for other people just like them. Like that goes such a long way versus, anything that's going out to your gross leads. That's kind of the importance. That's the history on it. And, it's really valuable that we've seen.
And Andrei, I'm glad you mentioned those different touch points you have too, because for a lot of you, like your leads are local, and that's what at JL Smith, again, this is where we're marrying the marketing and business development lanes and activities that we're doing here. Because a lot of those that we've put in our qualified, not interested category, we've already spent the money to get them in our database, and they're qualified to work with you to move forward. So you'd be going right to discovery at this point. They've experienced something. They've downloaded an ebook. They've attended something before. They've watched probably multiple webinars at this point, if you offer them. But now inviting them to events, get them in person, invite them to a workshop, invite them to, if you're doing small group events or if you're doing a large group event and trying to get more, but they're qualified, build the rapport now, build the personal side. And so if you build up that category, and if you're not tracking this now and you want to add this, it'll build up quickly. Those that you do the call with and they say, yeah, you figure they're qualified but not ready to move forward yet, that'll build up quickly. And now you'll have enough to say, all right, I'm going to hold an event and invite them all there. And I think you'll all see the returns quicker than you think there. So that flew by, and we probably could do a whole other session on this with all the questions we had either coming in through the chat or that we had prepared. So maybe we'll see a future topic on this. Please check out, if you did want more on this topic too, check out Mentor Connect and the resource that we have, some of the marketing and BD resources on C2P Central on the LMS there. And of course, as always, feel free to reach out to any of us directly, especially here on the panel today, myself, Desiree, and Andrei. So Andrei, Desiree, thank you very much for sharing your expertise as usual. And thank you all for attending today. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday.
Thanks for tuning in. This podcast was brought to you by C2P, an organization whose purpose is to educate, train, grow, and support holistic financial advisors so families can achieve true prosperity. Never miss an episode by subscribing now to discover new resources and strategies. Visit c2penterprises.com to learn how we can help scale and secure your business. At At the time of delivery and any subsequent publishing, information was deemed reliable, but is subject to change by the time of listening or viewing. The contents of this piece include options and projections of C2P, are subject to change, and are for informational purposes only. The information provided in this presentation is not intended to be individual investment, tax, or legal advice.